My ex swore that if I ever left him, he'd take my whole family down with me. I left anyway. 3 months later, he walked up my dad's driveway, and found my brothers waiting on the porch with guns. My name is Maris, I'm 27, and the day I'm about to tell you about happened 3 months ago. It feels like it was yesterday, and also like it happened to some other version of me in another life. I met Dax when I was 23. He was the kind of man who held doors open, remembered my coffee order after meeting me once, and looked at you like you were the only person in the room. I remember thinking, finally. Someone who really sees me. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs so clearly it almost makes me sick. But when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. The first time Dax really lost his temper was about 6 months in. We were at a bar with friends. Some stranger came up to me and asked where the restroom was. That was it. Just directions. I pointed down the hall and went back to my drink, thinking nothing of it. Dax didn't say a word there. But when we got back to my apartment, he tossed his keys so hard they clattered against the wall and snapped. So you enjoyed flirting with that guy in front of me? I stared at him, stunned. What? He literally asked where the restroom was. He kept pacing, jaw clenched, eyes too bright. Nothing I said mattered. His version of reality had already settled in his head. Then, out of nowhere, he punched a hole straight through the drywall next to my bookshelf. The sound was so loud I actually flinched like he'd hit me. My heart hammered in my chest. For a moment, I thought this was it, that his fist would be in my face next. He didn't touch me that night. Instead, he crumpled onto the couch and started sobbing. Real shaking, messy sobbing. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, he kept repeating, grabbing at my hands. I've never felt this way about anyone. Thinking of losing you makes me crazy. My old man used to hit my mom. I swore I'd never be like him. Please, Maris. Give me another chance. He wrapped his childhood around the violence like a blanket and handed it to me as an explanation. And I took it. I told myself it was just a one-time thing. That he was stressed. That people could change. I wish I'd listened to the part of me that was shaking so hard I couldn't sleep that night. People like Dax don't jump from zero to disaster in a day. It's a slow boil. First, it was the way he casually glanced at my phone when I texted. Just a peek over my shoulder, a joke about my mysterious life. Then he asked for my passcode. When I hesitated, his whole demeanor shifted. What are you hiding, Maris? We argued for hours. It didn't matter that I had nothing to hide, the fight was about obedience, not honesty. I was exhausted, worn down, and in the end I gave him the code just so he would stop. Next came the tracking app, just so I know you get to work safe, he said, framing it like romance. This world is crazy. I just worry about you. It sounded caring. It felt suffocating. But by then, I was already used to explaining, justifying, smoothing things over. So I let him install it. My best friend Taryn noticed first. She pulled me aside one night after I bailed on yet another girl's dinner and actually showed up at my place unannounced. You're disappearing, she said quietly. Is everything okay with you and Dax? I laughed. Told her we were just obsessed with each other, that new relationship bubble, you know? She didn't look convinced. Dax didn't like Taryn. Said she was jealous, said she wanted to break us up. Every time I made plans with her, he'd sulk or pick a fight. It was easier to cancel than deal with the fallout. That's how it happens. You stop going out. Then you stop making plans. Then one day you look up and realize your entire world is one person, and that person is unstable. A year into the relationship, I barely recognized myself. I used to love my book club. I used to have movie nights with coworkers. I used to drive home to Willow Creek every other weekend to see my family. Now? The invitations kept coming, and I kept inventing reasons to say no. My family lived 2 hours away in that small town I grew up in. My mother, Sharon, is a former Marine, small, wiry, and tougher than anyone I know. My older sisters, June and Corinne, both in their 30s with families of their own, had always been my built-in best friends. My younger brother, Miles, is the kind of person who can make anyone laugh in under 10 seconds. We've always been close. Or we were. Then Dax started picking fights on the mornings I was supposed to drive home. You'd rather be with them than with me, he'd say, or, I guess your real priority is clear. The guilt was heavy and constant. Eventually, it was easier to text my mother and say I had to work than endure hours of accusations and sulking. My father, Daniel, would call to put Sharon on speaker, and I'd hear the hurt in her voice when she asked. Did we do something? Did we upset you, honey? It broke something inside me every time. But I couldn't say, no, you didn't. I did. I chose a man who scares me. So I lied. Again. And again. The first time Dax actually hit me was on our 1-year anniversary. We went to a nice restaurant, white tablecloths, candles, the whole thing. The waiter was polite, a little chatty, but nothing unusual. Dax went quiet halfway through the meal. I knew that kind of quiet. It was the kind that meant trouble was brewing. When we got back to his place, he shut the door with too much force and turned around slowly. "Why were you trying to embarrass me?" he asked. I blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The waiter," he snapped. "You were laughing at his jokes. You touched his arm." Dax, I didn't. I was just being polite." The slap came out of nowhere. It was so hard I saw flashes of white. My ears rang. For a second, I couldn't even process that his hand had actually connected with my face. Then the pain hit. He froze. Looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else. "Maris." "Oh my, Maris, I'm sorry." He stepped closer, reaching for me as I instinctively flinched. "I didn't mean to. You make me crazy. I love you so much it scares me." The cycle repeated, tears, apologies, promises. And I stayed. I started wearing more makeup. Long sleeves in summer. I became an expert at explaining bruises. Oh, I tripped. Cabinet door. You know me, so clumsy. Bumped into a shelf. People accepted it. They wanted to. 2 years in, Dax proposed. Looking at the photos, you'd think I was the happiest woman alive. But when he knelt down with that ring, my stomach turned into a knot. I didn't say yes because I was thrilled. I said yes because I was afraid to say no. By that point, he'd convinced me no one else would ever tolerate me. That I was too emotional, too difficult, too needy. He'd chipped away at everything I liked about myself until all that was left was this constant low-level shame. "You're lucky I stay," he'd say. "No one else would put up with you." He commented on my weight, my hair, my clothes, my laugh. There was nothing about me he didn't slowly poison. I believed him. The engagement lasted about 6 months before something inside me finally cracked. It was Taryn who pushed through the fog. One weekday afternoon, she showed up at my apartment without texting first. She later told me she'd planned it that way because she knew if she asked, I'd brush her off. I opened the door wearing sunglasses. Inside. She didn't say anything at first. Just stared. My lip was split, swollen and clumsily covered with concealer. She stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her, and whispered, "Take off the glasses." I did. Her face crumpled when she saw the bruise blooming around my eye. "What happened?" Her voice shook with anger and fear. I started to tell the same lie I'd told Dax's father the day before, that I'd slipped on the stairs, but the words caught in my throat. It was like something inside me finally gave out and the truth spilled out to fill the space. I told her everything. Every slap. Every threat. Every time I'd thought, this is my fault, and stayed anyway. Taryn held me while I cried into her shoulder like a child. "This is not your fault," she said over and over. "He is not your responsibility. If you don't leave, he's going to seriously hurt you, or worse." She wanted me to leave that day. Right then. Pack a bag, get in her car, and never look back. But fear is sticky. I told her the part I'd never told anyone, that Dax had threatened not just me, but my entire family. He'd said he knew where my parents lived. Where my sisters worked. Which school my nephews went to. He listed the details casually, to make sure I understood he'd done his research. "If you ever walk out," he'd said once, almost bored, "I'll make sure you watch what happens to them before I come for you." Taryn went pale when I repeated that. "Maris, you can't stay," she said. "But you also can't leave without a plan." She pressed a spare key into my hand. "If you ever decide to go, day or night, you come to my place. You don't even have to call first. Just show up." I promised her I would. It still took me 3 months to be ready. I started small. Documents first, birth certificate, passport, social security card. My grandmother's jewelry. Old photo albums. I'd tuck a few things into my work bag and leave them in the trunk of my car. On my lunch break, I'd swing by Taryn's place and drop them off. Dax never noticed anything missing. I opened a new bank account and had a small part of my paycheck routed there, just enough for him not to notice the difference. Every dollar felt like one more inch of rope in my hands instead of around my neck. At work, I changed. I'd been there 5 years. I used to be lively, chatty, the one organizing birthday cakes and office outings. Now I was quiet, jumpy, exhausted. My manager, Marjorie, finally pulled me into her office one afternoon. "Maris," she said gently, "are you okay?" The dam broke again. I told her everything. The holes in the wall. The bruises. The threats. The tracking apps. All of it. She listened without interrupting, without flinching. "I've been where you are," she said softly. "I left someone like that 10 years ago. I know how hard it is. And I know this part is important, leaving is the most dangerous time." She made me repeat it back to her. "Leaving is the most dangerous time. You need a plan," she said. "And you need support. I'll help however I can." She gave me her personal number. Told me I could call any time, day or night. I went home that night with a little more strength in my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Taryn. I had Marjorie. I had a plan forming. The final straw came on a Tuesday in April. We were on the couch, a show playing in the background. Dax's mood was off. I could tell by the way his jaw was set, how he kept flexing his hands open and shut. My phone sat face down on the coffee table. I wasn't even touching it. He grabbed it anyway. He went through my messages like he had a right to every thought in my head. It didn't take long to find Taryn's name. Most of it was harmless, complaining about work, sending memes, making loose plans. But then he found one line from her. "You deserve better than this." "Better than what?" he demanded. "Better than me?" My heart dropped into my stomach. "No, she didn't mean it like that," I started, but he was already on his feet. "Are you planning to leave me?" His eyes were wild now, all pretense gone. "After everything I've done for you? After I've put up with you for years?" He moved so fast I barely had time to react. His hand closed around my throat and slammed me back into the wall. My feet left the floor. My fingers clawed at his wrist as he squeezed. He leaned in close so only I could hear. "If you ever walk out," he hissed, "I'll end your whole family first. Your mom, your dad, your sisters, that little brother of yours. I'll make sure you see it. Then I'll come for you." He described it in sickening detail, not loudly, not yelling. Calm. Almost clinical. Like he was reciting a grocery list. Black spots started creeping in at the edges of my vision. Finally, he let go. I collapsed to the floor, coughing, my throat burning, my tongue bleeding where I'd bitten it. He grabbed his keys and walked out like he was just going for a drive. I stayed on the floor for a long time, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Then I reached for my phone. "Taryn," I whispered when she picked up. "I'm ready." She didn't hesitate. "Pack what you can carry and get out now. I'm calling the police." I threw clothes into a bag, grabbed my laptop, charger, and the small box of things I hadn't managed to move yet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the suitcase. I was halfway to the front door when I heard his car pull in. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and sprinted to the bathroom, locked the door, and slid down against it. "He's back," I texted Taryn with numb fingers. "Please hurry." Dax walked through the apartment calling my name in a sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. When he saw the packed bag by the door, the tone shifted. He pounded on the bathroom door so hard it rattled in the frame. "You liar," he shouted. "You were going to leave me? After everything? Open the door, Maris." I didn't answer. I just sat there with my back pressed to the wood and my hand over my mouth, trying not to sob. Taryn later told me it took the police 12 minutes to arrive. It felt like 12 hours. I heard them before I knew what was happening, firm voices in the living room, ordering him to step away from the door, to calm down. Dax tried to play it off, told them I was having some kind of episode, that he was just worried about his fiancée. But the officers had been to our building before for noise complaints. They'd seen enough bruises on enough women to recognize what they were looking at. By the time they knocked gently on the bathroom door and told me it was safe to come out, Dax was already in handcuffs. They took photos of the marks on my neck. Asked if I wanted to press charges. For the first time in years, I said one small, solid word. Yes. That night, I didn't go back to him. I went to Taryn's. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept in a place where the walls didn't feel like they were leaning in to listen to my fear. I spent that first night at Taryn's apartment shaking so hard I could barely hold the mug of tea she pressed into my hands. She gave me her spare room, fresh sheets, a clean towel, a pair of her pajamas because I'd left most of my clothes behind. She didn't ask for details. She'd heard enough on the phone to know the basics. When she finally went to bed, I lay there in the dark, every tiny sound making my heart jump. A car door outside. Pipes in the wall. A neighbor's TV. My hand still reflexively reached for my phone to check where Dax was on the tracking app, then I remembered he was the one who had tracked me, not the other way around. For a moment, I felt completely unmoored. Then a quiet thought settled in. He doesn't know where I am tonight. I clung to that. Dax posted bail the next morning. I found out when my phone started blowing up. First one call. Then another. Then another. Voicemails stacked up faster than I could delete them. The first few were apologetic. His voice sounded rough and trembling. Maris, please. I lost control. You know I love you. We can fix this. Just call me. Please. Then the tone shifted. How dare you do this to me after everything I've done for you? You think a piece of paper will stop me? You're not going to ruin my life. I blocked his number. He used a different one. Then another. Then email. Fake accounts on social media. Messages slipped through the cracks no matter what I did. Taryn insisted we go down to the courthouse and file for a protective order. The police report, the photos of my neck, and the history of previous disturbances made it straightforward. The judge looked at me over his glasses and said, Ms. Gray, if he comes within 500 feet of you, call the police immediately. I nodded, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my fingers hurt. Walking out of that courtroom, protective order in my hand, I thought I might finally be able to breathe. I was wrong. A piece of paper doesn't change someone like Dax. It just makes his anger sharper. He started showing up instead of just calling. He'd stand across the street from my workplace, leaning against his car, hands in his pockets. He stayed just far enough away not to technically violate the distance on the order. His lawyer had obviously explained the exact number of feet to him. He never shouted. Never approached. He just watched. I'd step outside at the end of the day and see him there, eyes locked on me. Every time, my knees felt like they might give out. My manager Marjorie noticed him first. Is that him? She asked one evening as we both stood at the window looking down at the parking lot. I swallowed hard. Yeah. She set her jaw. All right. You're not walking out alone. After that, I was never allowed to go to my car by myself. Coworkers started forming a loose ring around me, half joking about being my security detail, but their faces were serious. Dax never did anything in front of them. He just watched, expression flat, until I got in the car and drove away. I stopped sleeping properly. Food tasted like paper. I lost weight without trying. Every noise made me jump. The world felt dangerous in a way it never had before, as if the ground itself might give way. Taryn sat me down one night and said, "You can't live like this, Riss. He knows where you work. He knows your apartment. You need somewhere he doesn't know. Somewhere he'll think twice about going." There was only one place that fit that description. Willow Creek. I hadn't told my family the truth yet. I'd hid bruises on video calls, blamed my absences on my workload, told myself I was protecting them from worry. In reality, I'd just been protecting my illusion that I still had some control. Calling my mother was harder than calling the police. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, baby," she said, voice warm. "I was just thinking about you." I opened my mouth and, instead of the usual practiced lie, I heard myself say, "Mom, I need help." Silence. Then, "Tell me." So I did. I told her about the controlling behavior, the tracking app, the slaps, the time he left bruises on my ribs for a week. I told her about the night with his hand around my throat and his voice promising to hurt all of them. I expected anger or shouting or "I told you so." What I got was a small, cracked, "Oh, Maris," and the sound of her taking a shaky breath. "Come home," she said. "Right now. Your father and I will handle the rest." Hearing the slight tremor in Sharon's voice was almost more disorienting than anything else. My mother doesn't shake. She's the one who steadies everyone else. "I don't want him to hurt you," I whispered. She made a short, humorless sound that might have been a laugh. "Let him try," she said. Taryn took the day off to drive with me. We stuffed my few remaining belongings into her car. I left most of the furniture, none of it felt like mine anyway. It all looked like him. The couch where I'd cried. The lamp he'd knocked over. The wall with the patched hole. We didn't speak much on the drive. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. My mind kept jumping between memories and imagined futures, none of them stable enough to hold on to. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, my mother was already on the porch. Sharon wrapped me in a hug so tight I could feel the strength in her arms, the same strength that had once carried gear and weapons through a desert half a world away. Behind her, my father, Daniel, waited with his arms open. He wasn't a soldier. He was the quiet one, the steady one, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and how to balance a checkbook. He hugged me just as hard. My sisters, June and Corinne, were right behind them, eyes bright with unshed tears, their partners and kids hovering in the background, unsure but ready. My younger brother, Miles, stood by the door, hands stuffed in his pockets. He tried to joke, something about me bringing city drama to the quiet town, but his voice cracked halfway through and he had to look away. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole and also never to leave that porch again. The first week back home was strangely peaceful. I slept in my old room, same faded posters on the wall, same narrow bed. Taryn headed back to the city after promising to check in every day. My family gave me space when I needed it and company when I didn't want to be alone. For a few brief moments, I let myself believe Dax might just stop. That the arrest and the protective order and my disappearance would be enough to scare him into letting go. That illusion shattered the morning I got the first message at my new number. Nice place your parents have. White mailbox. Blue shutters. Cute wind chimes on the back porch. I went cold all over. I hadn't given my number to anyone except my family and Taryn. He must have called around, manipulated someone, or just guessed enough to get lucky. Either way, he had it. He sent photos next. One of my parents' house. One of Daniel's old pickup. One, zoomed in and grainy, of my mother kneeling by her garden, hands in the dirt. He'd been close. Close enough to take that picture. My hands shook as I showed the messages to my parents. Daniel's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. My mother's eyes went flat and focused, the way they must have been when she was across the ocean wearing a uniform. We called the local police. They were sympathetic. They took copies of the messages. They knew about the protective order. But Dax hadn't stepped onto the property or shown his face directly yet. He's right at the line, the officer admitted. We can't arrest him for driving by on a public road. But we can increase patrols. And if he shows up again, call us immediately. My mother saw the answer she didn't like written plainly between the lines. We'll be ready, she said quietly after she hung up. And she meant we, not just they. Sharon owned firearms. Always had. She treated them like tools, not toys. We'd all learned gun safety as teenagers. June and Corinne both had their permits. Daniel and Miles knew their way around every weapon locked in the heavy safe in my parents' closet. That night, they pulled the safe open and laid everything out on the dining table. Not to frighten me. To show me. My mother rested a hand on my shoulder. We do this on our terms, she said. Not his. We installed security cameras, front porch, back door, driveway, side yard. Motion-activated lights went up around the property. Sharon bought a large, serious-looking rescue shepherd mix from a local trainer. They'd named him Rook, after a piece on a chessboard that guards what matters. Rook took one look at me and glued himself to my side like he'd chosen his person. He barked at any unfamiliar car that passed too slowly. June moved into her old room with her wife and their son for a little while. Corinne came by every day after work. Miles turned the living room into a ridiculous fortress of board games and blankets for his niece's emotional support. Everyone claimed they were there just to help out around the house, but we all knew the truth. They were here to stand between me and Dax. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Dax never stepped onto the property, but the messages kept coming. Long paragraphs describing what he'd do if he got the chance, vague enough to dance around the law yet specific enough to make my skin crawl. He knew when my dad went to the hardware store, which route my mother drove to get groceries, where Kern's little boy got dropped off for preschool. He was watching all of them now, not just me. I stopped sleeping again. Ate because my mother put plates in front of me and gave me that look that brooked no argument. I started therapy with a local counselor, Dr. Rowan, who specialized in trauma. She gave me words for things I'd felt but never understood: hypervigilance, freeze response, learned helplessness. Your brain isn't broken, she said. It's doing exactly what it had to do to keep you alive. Some nights, that helped. Other nights, it felt like my fear was bigger than any explanation. Then one Saturday in May, he stopped being a shadow at the edges. He showed up. It was a bright afternoon, the kind you'd never associate with danger. Daniel and Miles were out back working on the old deck with June's wife, Lila, all 3 of them covered in sawdust and sweat. My mother and I were in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Corinne was in the living room with the kids, helping them build a blanket fort. The sound that changed everything was ordinary: tires on gravel. I glanced out the window above the sink. An unfamiliar sedan rolled into the driveway and came to a stop. Even from inside, even at that distance, I knew. Dax stepped out of the driver's side. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, hair overgrown and oily, beard patchy like it had been a while since he cared enough to shave. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Mom," I whispered. "It's him." She didn't even look out the window first. She believed me instantly. "Go to the hallway," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "Now. Away from the door. Corinne, get the kids upstairs." Her tone changed, louder but still sharp as a command. "Daniel," she shouted toward the back door. "Company. Not the good kind." Everything that followed happened in a blur. Corinne swept the kids up with a calm voice and urgent eyes, her son complaining that he wanted to finish his tower as she carried him up the stairs. Rook snarled at the front door, every hair along his spine standing up. My father and Miles came in through the back like a small storm. June and Lila right behind them. No one needed explanations. We'd rehearsed this in our heads too many times. Sharon opened the gun safe with shaking but sure hands. "This is defensive only," she said, looking each of us in the eye. "We're not looking for a fight. We're ending one that came to us." Daniel took his pistol. June strapped on her holster with a familiarity that made me both proud and sad. Lila checked the shotgun, not pumped dramatically like in movies, just a careful, practiced motion. They didn't rush outside. They took positions they'd already discussed, my mother at the doorway, Daniel and June flanking her, Lila slightly behind as backup. Miles stayed in the hallway with me and Rook, unarmed but solid, a final barrier between me and the front of the house. Dax reached the porch and started pounding on the door. "Maris," he called, voice cracking. "Maris, open the door. We just need to talk. They've poisoned you against me. I love you. Please." The sound of his voice through my mother's house felt like smoke seeping in under the door. Sharon opened it only a few inches, enough for her to step outside and close it firmly behind her, leaving the lock engaged. Daniel and June followed her onto the porch. I could hear everything through the thin wall separating the hallway from the front. "You need to leave," my mother said. Her voice didn't waver. "You're violating a protective order." "I'm here for my fiancée," Dax snapped. "She doesn't belong here." "She's not your fiancée anymore," Daniel said, quietly. "And the police have already been called." I could hear Dax's breathing from where I stood. Fast. Ragged. "She told me she loved me," he said. "She said we'd be together forever. You can't keep her from me." "You did that yourself," June answered. There was a shuffle of movement outside, a subtle change in everyone's stance. Miles shifted his weight beside me. "He's reaching for something," he murmured. I didn't think I could feel colder than I already did. I was wrong. "Dax," my mother said sharply. "Don't." Silence stretched for one long, razor-thin second. Then Dax's voice, higher now. "It's just my phone." Every muscle in my body stayed coiled. Somewhere in the distance, faint at first, I heard sirens. They were getting closer. And as their wail rose, slicing through the heavy air, I looked at Miles and realized we were all holding the same breath, waiting to see whether this would end with words, or something else entirely. The sirens grew louder until they were right on top of us. Outside, my mother's voice didn't change. "Dax, you are going to stand right where you are," Sharon said. "You are not going to reach into your pockets. You are not going to move toward this house. Do you understand me?" "I just want to talk to her," he snapped. "You can't keep us apart. She belongs with me." "You lost the right to say that a long time ago," Daniel said quietly. Tires squealed on the road. Doors slammed. Commanding voices cut through the air. "Sir, step away from the house. Hands where we can see them." I heard Dax curse under his breath. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "She's my fiancée. You can't. Hands on your head. Now." Rook's growl rumbled beside me, low and steady. Miles kept one hand lightly on my arm as if he knew that without that touch, I might run toward the window or the door or just crumple to the floor. I risked a glance through a slim gap in the curtain. 4 squad cars. Several officers with cautious, measured movements. Dax stood in the middle of the gravel, shoulders rigid, fury burning in his eyes. One wrong move and this could turn into something irreversible. For a heartbeat, I thought he might be foolish enough to try. Then some calculation must have clicked in his mind. His jaw tightened. He lifted his hands and laced them behind his head. They moved in fast. One officer read him his rights while another cuffed him. Dax didn't fight, but his chest heaved, and he kept craning his neck, searching the windows. I ducked back before his gaze found me. An officer broke off and approached the porch. "Everyone all right in there?" he called. My mother stepped aside and gestured him into the entryway. Daniel unloaded his pistol in one smooth, visible motion before setting it on the side table, palms open to show he wasn't a threat. "We're okay," Sharon said. "But he has been stalking my daughter and threatening our family for weeks." The officer glanced past them and saw me. I felt suddenly exposed, like he could see every night I hadn't slept and every bruise Dax had ever left. "You're Maris?" he asked gently. I nodded. My voice didn't want to work, but I forced out, "Yes." "We'll need a statement," he said. "And we're going to search his vehicle. Based on what you told dispatch, and what's on file in the city, that should be enough for probable cause." "All right?" I swallowed. "Okay." I watched from the hallway as they walked down to Dax's car. He stood beside a patrol vehicle, hands cuffed behind his back, surrounded by officers. His eyes were still sweeping the house, like he was trying to burn an image of it into his mind. Two officers opened the trunk of his sedan. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sirens had. One of them called something over his radio. Another shot a look toward the porch, toward us. Even from that distance, I could read the shift in his posture, alert, tense, suddenly more serious. "What is it?" I whispered. Miles' hand tightened on my arm. A few minutes later, the officer returned to the doorway. "In his vehicle," he said carefully, "we found a large hunting knife, duct tape, zip ties, rope, a tarp, and industrial-strength garbage bags." Something inside me went very, very still. I'd always told myself he was bluffing when he described the horrible things he'd do, if he had no choice. Some dark, frightened part of me believed him, but another part clung to the idea that he was just trying to scare me. That list of items didn't sound like fear tactics. It sounded like preparation. "Ms. Gray," the officer said, "I know this is difficult to hear. But it's good we have this now. It changes what we can charge him with." My knees wobbled. Miles guided me gently to a chair. My mother's face had gone pale, but her voice stayed steady. "What happens now?" she asked. "He'll be booked tonight," the officer said. "Given the existing protective order, his history, and what we found, it's likely the prosecutor will push for high bail and additional charges, stalking, criminal threatening, possibly attempted kidnapping. We'll need all of you to provide statements." I nodded mechanically. Statements. Photos. Evidence. Words stacked on top of each other, all to build something solid enough to hold him away from us. Dax shouted something from the yard, my name, dragged out and desperate. Rook barked, slammed his paws against the door. The officer glanced toward the sound. "For now," he said, "stay inside. We'll take it from here." Dax didn't make bail this time. The amount the judge set might as well have been $1 million. His lawyer argued that he had strong emotional ties, and was not truly a danger, just distraught. The prosecutor listed everything: the police reports, the protective order, the documented messages, the photo of my neck from the night he choked me, and now the contents of his trunk. The judge's expression never softened. Bail stayed where it was. And Dax went to county. I should have felt instantly safe. Instead, there was this odd, echoing quiet inside me, like my body hadn't caught up with the fact that, for the first time in a long time, he couldn't stand outside any door I walked through. The fear didn't vanish overnight. It softened at the edges. Like a bruise fading from purple to yellow. The months that followed were split between two worlds. In one world, there were legal procedures, meetings with the prosecutor, more written statements, recorded interviews. I learned words I never wanted to know: indictment, arraignment, evidentiary hearing. The prosecutor, a woman named Hollis, had calm, sharp eyes and a voice that could slice through nonsense like glass. "You are not responsible for his choices," she told me in our first meeting. "Our job is to make sure those choices have consequences. Your job is to survive and tell the truth." I clung to that sentence on the days when everything felt like my fault. In the other world, there was healing. Small, ordinary moments that meant more than any courtroom speech. My mother taught me how to make her grandmother's soup from scratch, the one she used to send in care packages during deployments. We chopped vegetables and listened to the radio and talked about nothing very important, which, after years of crisis, felt like a luxury. Daniel took me for slow walks around the neighborhood at dusk, when the sky turned pink and the air cooled. Sometimes we talked about fishing or books. Sometimes we just walked. His steady presence acted like a counterweight to the storm inside my head. Miles started leaving art supplies on my dresser: sketchbooks, pencils, a cheap set of watercolors. You used to draw all the time, he said, shrugging. Thought maybe you'd want to again. No pressure. I stared at the blank paper for 3 days before touching it. The first things I drew were small. A chipped mug on the kitchen table. Rook asleep with his paws twitching. My own hand. The lines were shaky, but they were mine. Dr. Rowan helped me untangle the invisible threads Dax had wound around my thoughts. Leaving didn't make you weak, she said. Staying didn't make you weak either. It made you human in an impossible situation. I argued with her at first. She was patient. Eventually, my arguments got softer. Sleep crept back in slow increments. First 2 hours at a time, then 3, then entire nights where I woke up surprised that the clock had moved so far without me watching it. My appetite returned. My clothes began to fit again. Color came back into my face. There were setbacks, too. Flashbacks triggered by a slammed door or a stranger with Dax's build walking past me in the grocery store. Nights when I woke up convinced I'd heard his voice only to find the house silent and Rook snoring by my bed. But the difference was, now I wasn't facing any of it alone. 3 months after his arrest, we went to court. Dax had refused a plea deal that would have given him fewer years in exchange for admitting guilt. His pride wouldn't allow it. He insisted he'd never meant to hurt anyone, that he was just in love. So there had to be a trial. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cleaning supplies, a strange mix of stale and sterile. The day I was scheduled to testify, my stomach twisted so violently I thought I might pass out in the hallway. Sharon squeezed my shoulder. You do not owe him anything, she said. You're doing this for you, and for anyone he might hurt next if this doesn't stick. Hollis met us outside the courtroom and walked me through the day in simple, clear language. Where I'd sit. Who would be there. When I'd be allowed to leave. If you feel overwhelmed on the stand, she said, say so. We can pause. You are not being graded on composure. Inside, everything looked like it did in movies, but flatter. No dramatic lighting. Just fluorescent hum and worn benches and a judge who looked tired down to his bones. And Dax. He sat at the defense table in a plain shirt and tie, hair trimmed now, beard neat, like someone had tried to polish him into something respectable. It didn't work. Those same eyes that had watched me across parking lots latched onto me the moment I entered. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't drop my gaze. His stare slid off me like water off glass. When it was my turn, the bailiff led me to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth. My voice caught slightly on the word whole. The judge nodded as if he understood. Hollis started with gentle questions. How I'd met Dax. How the relationship had changed over time. When the first slap landed. The first hole in the wall. The first time fingers closed around my throat. She didn't push for spectacle. She just let me tell it. The defense attorney's turn felt different. His suit was immaculate, his expressions carefully sympathetic. Ms. Gray, he said, if your partner was as frightening as you say, why didn't you leave sooner? Even though I'd expected that question, Dr. Rowan and I had practiced answers, something still stung hearing it out loud, like the blame was sliding quietly onto my shoulders. Because I was afraid, I said. My voice shook, but I kept speaking. He told me he'd hurt my family if I tried to go. He knew where they lived, where they worked. I believed him. But you did leave eventually, he said. Is it possible that, in the fear and chaos of that night, you misread his intentions? Behind him, Dax's jaw clenched. I met the attorney's eyes. No, I said. I know exactly what he intended. And the items in his trunk show that, too. A ripple went through the courtroom. He tried a few more angles, that Dax had been emotionally unstable, that stress might have made him overreact, that all relationships have arguments. Hollis objected when he strayed too close to minimizing the violence. The judge sustained her often enough that the attorney's confidence frayed at the edges. When I stepped down from the stand, my legs felt like they had been replaced with unfamiliar material. But I was still upright. Still breathing. I'd told the truth in a room where he had to listen and couldn't interrupt. That mattered. Other witnesses followed. Taryn described the night I'd called her, voice shaking so much she'd barely understood me. She talked about the bruises she'd seen, the way I flinched at every sound. A neighbor from my old apartment testified about hearing shouting and crashes, about calling the police more than once. The officers who responded the night he choked me described what they found, the marks on my neck, the bag half-packed by the door, the rage they'd walked into. Sharon and Daniel took the stand, too. My mother's voice was steady as she described the messages, the photos of their home, the items found in his car. My father's hands trembled once when he talked about seeing that hunting knife laid out on the patrol car's trunk. He didn't apologize for the tremor. The defense called Dax's mother to speak to his character. She cried, talked about how her son had never been violent until this relationship, how he'd always been a loving boy. She said she couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. Hollis cross-examined her gently but firmly, asking whether she'd ever been afraid of her own husband, whether she knew what it was like to stay because leaving felt even more dangerous. The courtroom grew so quiet I could hear the buzzing of the lights. By the time closings came, it felt like the judge and jury had heard enough to fill a library, each piece of information a small weight on one side of a scale. Hollis ended simply. "This case is not about heartbreak," she said. "It is not about a romance gone wrong. It is about power and control. It is about a man who was told no and decided that answer did not apply to him. That cannot stand in a community that values safety and dignity." The jury disappeared into the deliberation room. Time stretched. My family and I sat together on the hard benches. No one talked much. Miles fidgeted with a loose thread on his jacket. Sharon watched the closed door like it was a battlefield. I felt oddly empty, like I'd poured everything out on that stand and didn't have anything left to think with. After 3 hours, the jury filed back in. I counted their faces like they were beads, trying to divine answers from furrowed brows and tight mouths. It was useless, but my brain needed something to hold. On the charge of aggravated stalking, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant guilty." My chest constricted. On the charge of criminal threatening, guilty. On the charge of assault, guilty. On the charge of attempted kidnapping, guilty. For a second, no one moved. Then everything blurred. Sharon's breath left her in a shaky exhale. Daniel's hand found mine and squeezed. Taryn, sitting in the row behind us, pressed a tissue into my other palm. Dax stared straight ahead. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just sat there, as if this were happening to someone else across a pane of glass. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. We went back to the same courtroom, sat in the same rows. This time, I didn't feel like I was walking into the unknown. The verdict had already set the map. The judge listed the counts, the recommended ranges, the aggravating factors, a pattern of behavior, escalation despite legal warnings, the contents of that trunk. "Mr. Voss," he said at last, "you have shown a profound disregard for the safety and autonomy of another person and her family." He paused. "I sentence you to a total of 8 years in state custody. You will receive mandatory counseling while incarcerated. Upon release, you will be subject to extended supervision and a permanent no-contact order. If you attempt to contact Ms. Gray in any way, you will return to custody." 8 years. Part of me had wanted more. Part of me thought no amount of time could possibly balance the ledger. But another part whispered, "That's 8 years he cannot stand in another driveway with a trunk full of rope." They stood him up to lead him away. For a moment, he turned his head and looked at me. Those eyes that had once made me feel chosen, then trapped, now held something else entirely, a mixture of anger and confusion and something that might have been fear. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I just looked back, steady, unflinching. For the first time since I'd met him, I felt absolutely nothing when I saw his face. And that, more than the handcuffs or the sentence or the judge's words, was the clearest sign that he no longer owned any part of my life. He disappeared through the side door. The latch clicked shut. My knees finally gave way. I sank onto the bench, breath leaving me in a rush I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Sharon wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Daniel leaned his forehead briefly against mine like he had when I was little and scraped my knee. "You're free," my mother whispered. "He's not. And you are." I didn't know yet what freedom would look like. But for the first time, I believed it might be possible. The weeks after sentencing felt strangely quiet. Not the empty, terrifying quiet of waiting for his car in a parking lot, but the kind that comes after a storm has finally moved on. The house still stood. The trees were still bent a little from the wind. But the sky was clear. For the first time in years, my days weren't structured around someone else's moods. There were no sudden rages to anticipate, no careful calculations about what to say, what to wear, how to move through a room without drawing fire. I didn't realize how much space those calculations had taken up in my mind until they were gone and I didn't know what to do with the silence. So, I started filling it. I kept working remotely for my old company at first. Hollis had written a letter explaining my situation, my boss approved the arrangement without hesitation. But as the months passed, I realized I wanted a life that wasn't tied to the city where everything with Dax had happened. When a job posting went up at the tiny library in our town, a part-time position helping with cataloging, events, and front desk, I applied with shaking hands, half convinced I'd never be able to talk to strangers again. The director, a silver-haired woman named Agnes, interviewed me at a round table between the mystery shelves. She asked about my experience, my favorite authors, why I wanted to work there. I like quiet, I said honestly. And, books have always. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe, have a nice day.